Joining me now to help with some fact-checking, Mark Thiessen, an American Enterprise Institute fellow and the former chief speechwriter for President George W. Bush. Mark, he says he does not care about the flack he's getting. What he does care about is the fact that we are ripping families apart.
Yeah, this was that's really what he cares about. Look, this was a moving, beautifully written, a moving, and a deeply cynical speech. Because if the President of the United States really believed a word of what he said, he would not be doing this with executive action. I mean, if you think about it, he's not trying to help illegal immigrants. He's trying to provoke a fight with the Republican Party. And the money quote was, and I'll give it to you here, he said, meanwhile, don't let a disagreement over a single issue be a deal breaker on every issue. That's not how our democracy works, and Congress certainly shouldn't shut down the government again because we disagree on this. That's exactly what he wants. That's exactly what he wants the Republicans to do. He is trying to goad the GOP into self-destructive behavior. He wants them to shut down the government. He wants somebody to go out there and offer articles of impeachment. He wants somebody to go out there and say something bad about immigrants because he wants to rally his base, and he wants to make the GOP blow itself up. And so this was a cynical use of the immigration issue to advance his political goals.
You don't think he's interested in winning Republican votes at all?
Well, let's put it this way. If he had given the exact same speech minus the executive action, this would have been probably one of the most powerful speeches of his presidency. This would have been a clarion call for Republicans to, if he had just said, let's work together in a bipartisan way in order to pass this bill, he would have had a supermajority of Americans behind him. 74% of Americans believe there should be a path to citizenship if people pay their taxes, pay a penalty, and have a security background check. But 48% oppose what he's doing. So if he had said, let's do this the right way, this was a call for legislation as opposed to an explanation of executive action, he could have rallied the country. But he's less interested in winning Republican votes than using immigration to drive voters away from Republicans.
Well, it was interesting to see that only the cable nets even took the speech tonight. The main networks, the mainstream media networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC said, we're not taking it.
And they said, and the explanation in Politico today was because it's so overtly political. I mean, even the mainstream media recognizes that this is just politics. I mean, and it really is kind of, it's so.
But he got on Univision.
He did get on Univision.
On
that's
the night
right.
of the Latin Grammys.
Coincidences are amazing in politics, aren't they, Megan?
Well, I mean, this is, what does it tell us?
It tells us that he is interested in, one, provoking Republicans, and two, rallying the base that abandoned him in the midterm elections. This is an effort not to right the immigration system; it's to right his political ship, so that they can control the Senate after the next election and get their ducks in order for the 2016 races. This is a cynical use. I mean, these stories he told, quoting scripture, talking about these immigrants who had come here, and these moving stories. If all of that was for the purpose of a bipartisan effort, then it would have been beautiful. But it was done in a way that is completely not, it's unilateral, that is intended to blow up the process. He knows he's not going to get immigration reform passed.
He talks about, are we a nation that accepts the cruelty of ripping children from their parents' arms? Or are we a nation that values families? Accepts the cruelty of ripping children from their parents' arms. To me, that struck me as ironic because he, by executive action, allowed children who had been brought here illegally by their parents made an unlawful move, to stay. He did that by executive action a couple of years ago. Now that those parents are still ostensibly being told that they need to leave, he says we're ripping the children from the parents' arms. It's like, well, the only reason the children and the parents are separating, if they are ostensibly, is because you said that children could stay even though they've been brought here illegally.
And who in his mind wants to rip children from their parents' arms? Republicans. Conservatives are trying to rip children out from their parents' arms. That's what the implication of that statement is. The reason we don't have comprehensive immigration reform today, why that bill didn't pass in the House last year, is because of his immigration policies. His last executive order spurred 50,000 undocumented children, unaccompanied minors, to the border, which meant that any pro-immigration reform Republican couldn't possibly vote for comprehensive immigration reform. And now he's going to do it again, create another magnet to the border that's going to undermine reform. He knows this is not going to lead to legislation.
We've got the lawyers here, and we're going to get into his obvious failure to explain his sudden realization that he has the legal authority to do this after 6 years of saying explicitly that he doesn't. But I do want to ask you about his references to past presidents, because he repeatedly, prior to this, the White House and its defenders have cited President Bush, Bush 41, and President Reagan, saying, and the president tonight said all Democratic and Republican presidents have done actions similar to this one.
Yeah, President Reagan and President Bush 41 did executive action after Congress had just passed immigration reform. President Obama is taking executive action explicitly because Congress will not pass immigration reform. So it's the exact opposite of what Reagan and Bush did. And I love the fact that he quoted George W. Bush, which is the first time he did it without blaming him for something. But that was cynical too. I mean, of all the times to pick George W. Bush, he's now using he's quoting him now.
Well,
this is a cynical effort.
It was interesting because those presidents did what they did was Ronald Reagan granted true amnesty, where 3 million people received the right to stay here with the cooperation of Congress. It was a law. But then he needed to do an executive action to help implement that law, and then so did the person who succeeded him, George H.W. Bush. So they, with a law on the books, issued executive actions to try to implement that law, things that hadn't been covered. And then Congress said, all right, we'll do it. They ratified the actions, but then actually passed another law that said, just in case another president is thinking about doing this, we want to make perfect clear, this is not your authority, this is ours, so stop doing that. So it's an interesting thing because that piece of it gets left out when people are talking about this situation. Mark, thanks for being here.